Hi everybody, this is Jeff Wilson from Novometrics Research. Today we're going to be talking about how Guelph-Wellington went about getting its own COVID-19 vaccine. Using the example of COVID-19 vaccination, we're going to be learning how to apply the principles of community network integration, or CNI, to any issue of interest to you. And we're going to be learning what's happening with COVID vaccination in Guelph-Wellington and how to use that information to take charge of your own health. Now, although there are lots of details in moving any community issue forward, the fundamentals are really quite simple. First and foremost is keeping yourself and your team in a state of high emotional energy, or what we call high E. That is somewhere between optimism and passion. Now, that might sound overly simplistic and counterintuitive. So why would this be so? Well, firstly, from a cognitive perspective, the ideas that you're going to come up with to move your issue forward will be much, much better if you're somewhere between optimism and passion than if you're in a state of doubt, fear, frustration, anger, or some other low energy state. Secondly, you'll need the resilience that comes from being optimistic, regardless of what's happening around you, in order to move forward easily past the inevitable roadblocks that you're going to encounter. I thought the easiest way to explain this might be by telling the story of how we went from ground zero to where we are now. We don't have time to go into a lot of detail on this here, but part of our approach has been a daily practice of managing our emotional energy state through 10 or 20 minutes of meditation every morning and some simple cognitive exercises to move upward on the upward spiral, like in the diagram on the right, as opposed to moving downward through fear, frustration, doubt, and that sort of thing. This stuff really, really works. Not only is it proven medically, it's been a cornerstone of entrepreneurial and creative thinking for over 100 years. We began by building on previous successes in using CNI. This included projects in honeybee health, antimicrobial resistance, Lyme disease, and a host of others. If you're not familiar with CNI, you can check out the YouTube video called Community Network Integration that's shown on the right of this slide. Now, in March of 2020, it became obvious that COVID would be a great fit with CNI. For years, I had worked with the Public Health Agency of Canada as an epidemiologist, and our team had managed many of the major national outbreaks at the time, like Walkerton, so we had a lot of experience in that area. I had already shown the CNI model to Teresa Tam and her chief scientist, Pascal Michel. We didn't know where exactly to start, but social distancing seemed like an easy entry point. So a couple of hints. Just get started. Don't wait for the perfect plan. It will emerge. And if you need information on how to proceed, find someone who has it. So we got started on developing some materials on social distancing and posting them on social media, our website, and so on, just to get started. Then we continued to reach out to key influentials and informants in the Guelph-Wellington area, provincially, nationally, and globally. We began gathering information on what was going on through these conversations, but also by looking into the scientific literature, media reports, and so on. And we began collecting that all into a simple spreadsheet. So some hints, again, get started on what feels right for you. Trust your intuition. Talk to people. Gather information on your issue. Document it and build simple systems to organize yourself and your team. So as we collected this information, it began becoming obvious that a bunch of things were going on. First of all, the outbreak was being run by politicians, not by public health, which is a big no-no. As a result, most known outbreak best practices were simply being ignored. And finally, misinformation about the outbreak and about what was being done and about what should be done was being actively spread by institutional PR departments, by senior administrators, and by the media, largely unchallenged. So the public was not getting the right information in terms of what should be going on and what was actually going on. So to begin creating a more appropriate narrative, We began summarizing outbreak best practices in a 5-point plan, and we began sharing that. So in terms of hints, at the risk of repeating myself, number one, trust your instincts. Two, document best practices and begin sharing them. And three, work your network and never be afraid to connect to so-called important people. Well, the more people we connected to, the more amazing people started to show up wanting to help. One good example is our communications team. All of these people showed up through other contacts, and all of them are now working pro bono to assist with this endeavor across the vaccine, but a whole bunch of other COVID areas. So Vicki Allers is the sister-in-law of one of our epidemiologists. Bernie Gauthier, I met through Cheryl, my sister-in-law. Cheryl worked as a producer at CTV television for years, and Treasure, who some of you met at one of our previous Future of Guelph meetings, I've known her through years through other contacts. They started creating messaging, letters, and helped massively with media strategy. Here are a couple of hints. Start a vision board, either on a big piece of cardboard or in PowerPoint. Just start cutting and pasting pictures, images, words consistent with your vision. Very powerful in terms of aligning the team, influencing your unconscious, your subconscious mind, and raising your energy level. And the second one is timing is important. Some things just take time. You can't necessarily force them. So patience is part of this. A really good piece of cognitive therapy or a mantra is this one: all in good time, nothing to prove. So if you're feeling stressed, like things have to happen today, just take a deep breath and just go, all in good time, nothing to prove here. When you do that, I guarantee you, things start to speed up. Well, as more and more people showed up, more and more crazy synchronicities or coincidences started happening. One day I got a LinkedIn message from a guy I'd never met before by the name of Alex Gaidamaka. He and his partner, Nick Petrovsky from Australia, had been working on coronavirus and other pandemic vaccines for over 15 years and were asking if anyone could assist them in getting funding for their COVID vaccine. We called them and it was immediately obvious that they were the real deal, and we've been working with them ever since. So trust your instincts and pay attention to synchronicities, your spidey senses. If someone reaches out to you, there's almost always a reason, even though it might not be immediately apparent what it is. With all this, we began making some funding applications. So it was recommended, for example, that we apply to the Canadian Institute for Health Research, the Federal Vaccine Task Force, and so on for some of our vaccine and other work. As we did this, it began to become clear that these agencies are heavily stacked in favor of major suppliers. By that I mean big corporate, big government, and big academia. The Vaccine Task Force clearly had major conflicts of interest. 18 were declared among 11 members. One member resigned because of the level of conflict of interest on the panel, and the panel was stacked with former pharma executives. When we talked to political figures, so members of parliament, members of provincial parliament, and so on, they were supportive and sympathetic, but frankly not particularly helpful. So a few hints: be creative. Apply for funding and begin crowdfunding. Don't rely on people in positions of authority to fix things for you. Manage your energy. If you get a rejection, move yourself upwards on the emotional grid and then regroup. Try something else. As things unfolded, we increased our outreach. So we ran a local leadership team meeting here at our place in our barn last summer. We held 2 online global leadership team meetings. We started to become a lot more active on social media, so LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, that sort of thing, and we got a part-time intern to run that for us. We had good connections with local media. We became something of a of a regular fixture on iHeartRadio with Dave Trafford, who's been extremely supportive of all this. And of course, we got invited into the Future of Guelph meeting. All of this increased our outreach, our impact, this sort of thing. A couple of hints. So use media and social media. Draw on expertise within your network to help you with that, if that's not your area of expertise. And organize or participate in local, national, and global meetings. One of the people we met on LinkedIn is Larry Gold. Larry has a following now of about 4,500 people advocating for the safe reopening of restaurants and small business. With him, we met with multiple mayors, councillors, association leads, and so on, and we learned more about how they worked and how they could become involved. And we started a safe reopening of Main Street project. So be active on LinkedIn. Comment on things, like things, reach out to people, and start creating tangible, scalable pilot projects. Well, pretty soon, some clear vaccine opportunities began emerging. First of all, it started to become clear that the so-called leading vaccines are actually not likely to be adequate for Canada. There are a bunch of reasons for this. One is that they don't properly address the issue of stopping transmission. They're not effective for rapidly pivoting on the new variants, which are now becoming dominant, and they're not manufacturable in Canada. And they all have to be embedded within the 5-point outbreak response plan, which they're not, in order to be effective. Another thing that emerged was that institutional leads, so government, academia, business, and so on, were clearly focusing not on the priority of dealing with the pandemic, but on their own institutional and career aspirations. And they were highly aligned. So major players in government, corporate, and academia were aligning to advance what is not actually effective known process for outbreak response, in spite of a very substantial emerging published scientific literature on that. At the operational level, we started to see that many people in these institutions are simply afraid. They're afraid, they're concerned, and we began calling them silent whistleblowers. So people who want to help, they're not willing yet to threaten their career by doing it publicly, but in confidence started becoming very helpful in terms of letting us know what was going on, suggesting means to advance proper outbreak response, and so on. So some hints. First of all, understand that powerful interests will align to thwart the needs of the people. That's not conspiracy theory. It's simply business as usual at this stage in human history. Well, that all being said, in January of 2021, our Australian friends, their vaccine, COVAX-19, was successfully through their animal studies, mice, ferrets, monkeys, elderly monkeys, which is the best model to replicate the human condition. They'd been successfully through their phase 1 clinical trials, including an extension into the elderly, the immunocompromised people, Aboriginal groups, and so on in Australia. They needed to work with Canada to do their phase 2 and 3 studies because Australia doesn't have very many COVID cases. So the pressure was on. Nick sent us all the documentation from Australia so we could do a Health Canada submission. Turns out that the Australian and Canadian regulatory processes are very similar. We began to connect to our manufacturing partners, our clinical trial people, the doctors, laboratory partners, and so on to run phase 1, 2, and 3 trials here in Canada. Turns out that the costs of what we're doing are going to be radically lower than what the federal government is already providing to big pharma groups, largely because we were able to get so much stuff for free because people are donating it, because it's a humanitarian effort. The remainder, we're now crowdfunding. It's now the end of February. The vaccine submission should be ready within a few weeks from now, and Health Canada has a 30-day turnaround period for approvals. So in moving forward pilot projects, a few hints. Focus on transparency of what you're doing. Focus on a positive motive and a positive intent. The end game. Many people are claiming to be looking at the end game, but really they're looking at their own personal gain or their own institutional motives. Focus on building credible science and social science into what you're doing, and credible and effective business process, and focus on value creation and cost reduction. Often you can do very effective things quite inexpensively. So now we're implementing a series of community COVID projects, intersecting ones, using proper outbreak response best practices. So these, as you can see here, it includes manufacturing facilities, restaurants and small business, social bubbles, long-term care, and a range of others. Of course, determinants of health are a critical part of COVID response. So that includes obviously mental health, housing, social justice, economic resilience, all that sort of thing. My suggestion, be prepared as you get on this path for growth of a series of intersecting projects across multiple issues, multiple networks, and multiple geographies. As this grows, all sorts of different people now, suppliers and collaborators, are stepping forward to help, providing all sorts of things. So everything from HEPA filters for air control, COVID aerosol detection, sniffer dogs, antibody tests, and a whole range of technical, business, and public health expertise. You're building a movement here, so I'd recommend you see it like that, and make sure to reach out to other people for help. There are people out there that will be glad to help because they share your interest and your concern for your community. Here are some takeaway messages. I'd recommend you manage your energy daily, believe in yourself and your team, and trust your intuition. Never give up, but be flexible in your approach. Bring the right people together with the right skills, encourage them, but give them the latitude to do their own thing, and build credibility through expertise. If you don't have that expertise, reach out to get it through your network. Don't automatically defer to authority. They often are wrong, or they have motives other than the actual benefit of their constituencies. And finally, COVID vaccine is only one part of COVID, which is only a training ground for preventing future pandemics and for creating the world we want. If you'd like more information on the things that are in this video, then feel free to email me, jbwilson@novometrics.com. If you want more information on the vaccine trial, as well as other related things like COVID testing, managing your own bubble based on public health best practice and so on, then you can reach out to Terry Alleman, terry.alleman@novometrics.com.